Story 1: Solo Survival. I grew up camping and doing backpacking trips with my family all over the Sierra Nevada mountains. In my early 20s, I began undertaking solo wilderness trips, some of which lasted for weeks. These adventures often involved elaborate arrangements, like my dad dropping me off at a trailhead outside Yosemite and picking me up in a location as distant as Smith Valley, Nevada, 3 weeks later. To ensure safety, I always carried a GPS locator with communication capabilities to stay in touch with my family and carefully plan my routes. Additionally, I carried a pistol for protection, with the first 2 rounds loaded with snake shot due to the prevalence of rattlesnakes in the regions I explored. I was on a solo hike across the Ansel Adams Wilderness, without a tent, just my sleeping bag under the stars. Everything went just perfectly until I ran into an unforgettable, terrifying moment on the 3rd day. As the sun began to settle, and I was by a small lake preparing for the night, a terrifying encounter occurred. Upon deciding to stand, I lifted my gaze, and holy macaroni, I find this massive mountain lion merely 20 feet away. The moments were tense, yet oddly calm. I quietly resumed my seat on the rock, unholstered my pistol without any sudden movements. My intention wasn't to harm the creature. I was aware that the limited ammunition, starting with snake shot followed by .38 rounds, might not be effective. If it came down to it, I hoped the noise or a minor wound might scare the lion, or at least alter its behavior. So, there I was, 40 miles away from any sign of civilization, and now I found myself face to face with a lion. Not knowing what else to do, I started talking to it. I told the lion about my hike that day, the things I saw, and even talked about the weather. I even joked, asking the lion if it knew any good spots to grab a bite, preferably somewhere that didn't serve human food. The conversation went on for maybe a minute or so, while the lion paced very slowly, never breaking eye contact. Then, after what seemed like forever, it just casually turned around and walked away. After that tense experience, I found myself sitting and talking for about 20 minutes, trying to calm myself down. Sleeping was difficult, especially trying to hold a knife in one hand and a pistol in the other. But once my eyes were closed, it seemed like an instant. Then the sun was back up. As I got closer to the end of the trip, an unexpected and unusually high heat wave came in. The temperature was over 105 degrees at 10,000 plus feet elevation. The water sources that I had relied on seemed to have dried up overnight. Although I was aware of some natural springs, they were either off my planned route or about 20 miles away. Without exerting more energy than I needed to, I still arrived at my rendezvous point a day ahead of schedule. However, a complication arose when my dad experienced a tire blowout, delaying his arrival by nearly a day. To make matters worse, the water source at our meeting spot had completely dried up, leaving me to face approximately 60 to 72 hours in the scorching heat at high altitude without any water. In an effort to survive the extreme conditions, I utilized a solar still and also wrapped a bag around some plants to condense and collect a small amount of water. This minimal supply was just enough to keep me alive. By the time my dad arrived, I was experiencing severe hallucinations and was in a pretty bad shape. Luckily, he came prepared with a case of Gatorade, vitamin water, a cooler full of ice packs, and protein bars. For precaution, I was later checked out by a doctor in Carson City to ensure there were no lasting effects from the dehydration and exposure. The heat wave was unexpected, with no warnings in the forecast, and water sources were plentiful until it struck, leaving little room for better preparation. This experience turned out to be one of my most terrifying trips. After recounting this and many other adventures, my wife has since refused to let me do long wilderness trips alone. And honestly, I don't blame her. Story 2. Unseen Predator. Sometime 2022, following the lift of the second lockdown, my partner and I were eager to return to camping. Having been unable to enjoy the outdoors for over a year due to the pandemic restrictions, we chose our favorite spot, a secluded area up the mountain that is rarely crowded. It's a hidden gem, not well known to many in the area. And if you ever did see anyone, they were usually miles away, making it the perfect hidden retreat. As has become our tradition, we brought my parents' elderly dog along with us. After setting up camp, we enjoyed some food and had some beer around the campsite. Before settling in, we scoped out the area to gauge how busy it might be. The area was completely dead. The entire mountain campgrounds were entirely empty. It was unusual for us not to spot at least one hunter or fisher in the vicinity, as we typically do on every trip. This time, however, we found ourselves entirely alone. So, we spent the evening by the fire, enjoying the peace with my little dog nearby. However, when we decided to head to bed, my normally calm and complacent pup refused to settle inside the tent. It's pretty hot this time of the year, so we left the tent unzipped, using only the mesh screen to cover the opening, hoping to catch a cooling breeze. My dog, however, seemed fixated on something outside, peering intently through the mesh and sniffing the air. His behavior was unusual, so we got curious about what had captured his attention. We got up to inspect the campsite, but we didn't see anything. So, my wife and I decided to sit by the fire in hopes of tiring ourselves out. But suddenly, we were interrupted by our dog, who became visibly anxious. His hackles raised, emitting a deep, menacing growl toward a specific direction of the woods. Given his unexpected behavior, I grabbed the hunting knife and an axe and told my wife to remain calm as we listened carefully for any rustling sound. The dog's snarling and barking were surprising, as he had always been completely comfortable every other year. After a couple minutes of him remaining on high alert, I decided to turn on our truck's lights to brighten our campsite. We listened intently, trying to figure out what he was seeing or hearing. Just when he seemed to calm down, a few minutes later, the dog abruptly alarmed us again, with such intensity that we bolted for the truck, propelled by the forceful warning his behavior suggested. Inside the truck, with our hearts racing, my wife's face overwhelmed with fear as I tried to calm her down. We waited and watched for what seemed like forever, trying to spot something in the woods. After waiting for what felt like 20 to 30 minutes without hearing any more growling from the dog, I figured that whatever had been out there had probably moved on. I chose to step out of the truck and return to our seat by the fire, though my wife opted to stay in the vehicle. It wasn't long before the dog's hackles were up again. This time, I was frightened by the sound of a tree branch snapping loudly, incredibly close to us, just 10 feet away from our campsite. I was certain it wasn't the wind. The night air was still, and the snap was as clear as day, like it was caused by something breaking it forcibly. Given the circumstances, I needed no further warning to act. My priority became to gather any essentials from the tent, get the dog, and get into the truck to leave the area as soon as possible. Earlier in the night, we had heard the sounds of wolves hunting, their howls echoing through the woods, which was unsettling enough. However, Our main fear was the possibility of encountering a cougar. These animals are commonly seen in this area, and there have been numerous attacks on unsuspecting victims. The combination of these dangers convinced me that the safest course of action was an immediate departure. Our prevailing concern was that something had been stalking us for an extended period without showing any signs of moving on. When we shared our decision to leave for safety reasons with my partner's parents, we faced extensive mockery. Despite being equipped with minimal weaponry, nothing in our possession was sufficient to deal with a potential mountain lion or a pack of wolves. Throughout the weekend, we were taunted, called cowards, and ridiculed for our caution. Adding to my urgency was the need to protect our dog, who is quite small and would stand no chance against such predators. My friends constantly joke about it that it was a Bigfoot, and to be honest, I don't know that to believe. Story 3. My last time camping at night. During a 5-day-long weekend break from school, my friends and I decided to embark on a camping trip to the North Georgia mountains. We were a group of 5, 2 guys and 3 girls, and we brought along a large 10-person tent for our adventure. My buddy, an Army veteran, and I, both with some experience in outdoor activities like camping, hiking, and hunting, made sure we were well prepared. We loaded up his truck with our gear, including a propane grill, folding cot, and a portable shower, fully equipped to enjoy our weekend in nature. We left on Wednesday afternoon, leaving the truck in a small town before embarking on our hike into the woods to locate a suitable camping spot. The hike was exciting until we ventured about 4 to 5 miles in and stumbled upon a small clearing with a sizable pond or tiny lake. The moment we entered the clearing, a creepy silence took over. No birdsong, no rustling of squirrels. Even the movement of clouds and wind seemed to halt. Both my buddy and I sensed the presence of a predator, prompting us to draw our handguns, a precaution mandated by the laws in Kennesaw. Having never encountered a bear in Georgia, we speculated it might be a mountain lion, or perhaps coyotes causing the unusual stillness. While scanning the perimeter of the clearing, my friend suddenly grabbed my attention and gestured towards the opposite side of the water. There, approximately 150 yards away at the edge of the tree line, appeared to be a woman standing. Assuming she might be a local resident, we decided to proceed, walking past the pond and clearing. Yet, when I glanced back over my shoulder to the spot where the woman had been, she had vanished. Intriguingly, as we re-entered the woods, the normal sounds of the forest life resumed, marking a stark contrast to the silence we experienced by the clearing. We decided to establish our campsite about 2 miles past the clearing, as it was getting late, and we didn't want to be stuck building camp in the dark. After unloading and arranging our gear, we built a fire, cracked open some beers, and settled down to relax. The first night was completely normal. We gathered around the campfire, engaged in casual conversation, and exchanged jokes before retiring to our tent for the night. But the next morning, we found that the propane stove had been turned on, but not ignited, resulting in an empty fuel tank by morning. Pretty odd, if you ask me, since none of us had used it. However, the situation took a creepy turn on the second morning when we realized that some of our belongings were missing. A lantern that we had left outside by the fire had disappeared, along with the sweatshirt my crush, let's call her Naomi, had draped over a small folding chair. Initially, we assumed that these items were simply misplaced, Or perhaps someone in the group had used them and put them somewhere else. On our second full day, which was Friday, we set out to find a waterfall that we had read about online, located somewhere upstream. As we followed the river, the forest became weird. Dead, silent once again. My buddy nudged me and gestured towards the top of a hill adjacent to the river. Looking up through the trees, I could barely discern the figure of the same woman we had seen before. Same clothes, just standing there. It was unclear whether she was watching us, but she was just standing there. Anyways, we found the waterfall and put it out of our minds as the girls decided to skinny dip in the river. When we finally hiked back to the camp, something didn't feel right. Our camp was sort of a mess. It wasn't totally trashed, but it was evident that something or someone had rummaged through our belongings. To avoid causing alarm among the girls, we told them it was probably raccoons. Given the day's unsettling events, my buddy and I decided to err on the side of caution, opting to keep our guns within arm's reach as we went to bed for the night. That night, things took a turn for the worse. I remember waking up because Naomi was squeezing my arm so tight. I opened my eyes, and she hushed me before I could ask what was wrong. There was complete silence all around the tent. I looked across the tent, and my buddy were sitting halfway up, looking around. For the next couple of hours, we remained vigilant until daylight began to break. Without wasting any time, we packed our stuff, and the whole group set out on our return hike. The entire hike back into town was creepy, silent. There were a couple points I thought I saw the woman through the trees, but never got a clear sight of her. We avoided the lake completely and got back to the truck in what seemed like nearly half the time it took us to hike out. Once we were safely on the road home, everyone began sharing their experiences of feeling like they had seen or heard the woman throughout the weekend, but they were too scared to talk about it, hoping she would just disappear if ignored. The strangest part was that none of us could recall her face. It seemed blurry in our memories. We never figured out who she was, and since then, I've steered clear of camping or hiking at night. Story 4. The Watcher. During a group camping trip in a remote area of Arizona, we were startled awake by the sound of something sniffing around the outside of our tent. My first thought was that it could be a bear or some other animal, possibly attracted by the scent of our campsite. Maybe my friends had neglected to secure the trash properly. Moments later, the sniffing sound moved on to the tent next to ours. Everyone inside our tent quietly grabbed each other, a silent acknowledgement that we were all awake and aware of the presence outside. Shortly after, one of our friends from a different tent burst out, yelling and making a commotion. He also had a gun, with the intention of scaring away what we presumed was an animal lurking around our campsite. However, it turned out not to be an animal at all. Instead, it was a man who had been rummaging through our coolers and food supplies, and for some unfathomable reason, decided it was acceptable to sniff around our tents as well. Our friend managed to chase him away, and without hesitation, we swiftly packed up our belongings and left the area. My second creepy camping story. A year after the above incident, my dumbass friends and I went back to the nearby area, thinking what we encountered was a one-time incident. This time, we thought we'd outsmart any possible creepers, and instead of camping in our tents, we all slept in the beds of our trucks and SUVs. 'Cause, they can't possibly sniff a Toyota Tacoma. Anyways, it's the middle of the night. I'm passed out in the back of my SUV when I suddenly feel a bright light on my face. Naturally, I would have woken up, cussed, and asked who was doing that. However, I instantly knew to pretend to be asleep and not let the individual know I was awake. I laid there next to my girlfriend, hoping she would do the same as I, and I kept an ear out for any unusual sounds, like sniffing. All I could hear was a friend snoring by the campfire. Once the light moved away from my vehicle, I caught the sound of footsteps progressing towards the next truck, where the intruder began shining his light on my friends inside. Seizing a moment of courage, I cautiously peeked out, only to spot an older man simply standing there, ominously observing everyone as they slept. I held my position until he finally departed from our campsite. The moment he was out of sight, I hurriedly exited my truck and proceeded to rouse my friends, many of whom, it turned out, had also been feigning sleep, fully aware of the creepy situation unfolding around us. My advice is clear. Avoid camping in the areas surrounding Tucson, Arizona, unless you're prepared to encounter what feels like a scene straight out of The Hills Have Eyes, with creatures sniffing around and eerily watching you as you sleep. Story 5. The Mystery Campsite. So, I once went on a solo camping trip deep in the middle of nowhere in north-central Pennsylvania, driving over an hour on dirt Forest Service roads before hiking about 6 miles on a trail that was barely visible. It was clear that no one had been there recently. The trail was overgrown, untouched, with spider webs strewn across. My goal was to find a pleasant spot to set up camp, but the path, which followed a creek through a rocky, uneven valley, offered no such place. As the sun started to set, I reached a creek fork and spotted an inviting, flat area across the water. However, as I got closer, I noticed various items scattered around, which seemed out of place in such an untouched environment. Upon crossing the creek, I began to investigate the area. A tarp was spread on the ground near a stone fire ring, and nearby, a log had been chopped with an axe. Scattered around were items typically found in a hiker's backpack: food, a cooking set, a camping pad, a first aid kit, and more, all dispersed on the ground. Yet the backpack itself was nowhere to be seen. Closer to the creek, a pile of clothes appeared to have endured the previous day's rain, and a towel was draped over a tree branch. Additionally, there was a spot that had evidently been used as a latrine, indicated by the numerous piles of toilet paper, suggesting it had been in use for about 10 to 14 days. The most bizarre find was a makeshift cage constructed from saplings, roughly 4 feet square. It was designed with frames along the cube's edges and additional crossbars diagonally across each face. However, the structure had significant open spaces between the saplings, rendering it ineffective for containment. Moreover, given its construction from mere saplings, it lacked sturdiness, adding a creepy and puzzling element to the scene, the guy or something dangerous. Later, I kind of regretted it, because all night I barely slept and kept thinking I was hearing distant noises like footsteps. So, as soon as the sun came up, I quickly packed up and got the F out of there. In the end, everything was okay. No encounters with any dangerous person or animal. However, the mystery of that wooden cage-like structure continues to puzzle me. I reached out to the local Forest Service, shared the details, and even provided them with photos. They promised to dispatch a ranger to investigate and clear the area, but I never checked back to learn what they discovered. The ranger told me on the phone that it might be related to illicit activities like a hidden still, or a clandestine marijuana growth, or perhaps just some loner living out in the woods. And let me point out that I explored the surrounding valley before I set up my camp and didn't see anything suggestive of such activity. It seems unlikely because of how far you would have to carry equipment in, and the area isn't really ideal for growing pot. It could indeed have been just someone living off the grid, but the purpose of the cage remains a mystery. If there's curiosity, I might be able to dig up the photos I took. On a separate note, during a camping trip in Colorado last year, I experienced a chilling moment at around 2 a.m. when a pack of coyotes ran through my campsite, their howls echoing in the night. It felt like there were at least 20 of them. Surprisingly, my dog was asleep next to me the entire time. In hindsight, that was probably for the best, as he would have likely reacted fiercely, and coyotes are known to be more aggressive in groups. Story 6. Creepy Camp Tales. I have lots of stories to tell. For about 15 years, I've gone on camping trips that last from 3 days to a week, deep in the wilderness. Sometimes I go alone with my dog or with my best friend. The scariest things happened in the first 2 to 3 years when my friend and I were younger and acted recklessly, thinking nothing could harm us. Once, in southern Colorado, we reached the top of a mountain late in the day. As we descended, it got so dark we couldn't see much ahead. Our camp was further down the mountain, but navigating the steep, rocky slope in the dark was too difficult. So, we decided to camp right there in the wilderness. We found a large bush on the mountain that was shaped like a half circle with a space inside where we could sleep. It seemed like a natural shelter. We slept there, close to each other for warmth, and somehow managed to fall asleep. In the middle of the night, my friend woke me up, asking if I heard something. I listened and heard noises outside our bush shelter, like some creature walking and making an odd, not deep, but strange growling sound. We stayed very still, hoping whatever it was would leave. But it didn't. Instead, it moved around the bush and came to the open part where we were. It was so dark, we could only see a shape, but couldn't tell what it was. We were too scared to move, just looking ahead. My friend quietly asked, "What is that?" I carefully took out my phone, turned on the light, and there it was, a mountain lion looking very huge. It growled at the light, moved a bit like it was crouching, and just kept staring at us, growling in that strange way. Suddenly, my instincts kicked in. I knew we couldn't run, so I had to confront it. I slowly picked up the machete beside me, pulled it out of its sheath, and driven by a burst of adrenaline, I stood up, yelling loudly, waving my arms, and swinging the machete wildly. This must have scared the mountain lion, because it quickly ran away into the night. After that, we didn't wait around. We packed up and hiked back to our main camp, even though it took several more hours in the middle of the night. A year after our mountain encounter, the same friend and I decided to go on a week-long kayak trip down the Arkansas River. Being college students, we couldn't afford a real kayak, so we bought a 2-person inflatable one for about $250. It mostly worked fine, except we punctured it on a submerged tree on the second day. We fixed it and kept going. By the third day, we realized we were kayaking through hunting grounds during hunting season, hearing gunshots around us, which at the time seemed to add to our adventure. However, things took a strange turn on the night of the third day into the early fourth morning, an experience that remains unexplained to this day. In the middle of the night, we kept waking up to reignite our fire, hoping both to stave off the intense cold and to signal to any nearby hunters that there were people around. Around 4 a.m., in the deep darkness before dawn, we were tending to the fire when I noticed something in the woods to our left. A light, or reflective surface, that seemed to move. Initially, I dismissed it as possibly the eyes of a deer, but it continued to appear, and something about it felt unsettling. Before I could voice my concern, my friend noticed it too and asked, "Do you see that over there? What the heck is that?" We then realized we were both observing the same mysterious thing. The peculiar aspect was that there was only one light source, not like two reflecting eyes you'd see on an animal. It didn't beam light like a flashlight, but had a reflective quality, similar to how animal eyes light up in the dark. However, this was a single round object, slowly moving through the woods not too far from us, resembling an eye reflecting light back at us. Driven by confusion and curiosity, I stood up, took my dim flashlight, and aimed it toward the light, beginning to walk slowly towards it while calling out, "Hello?" There was no reply. "Hey, anyone there? We're just camping and about to leave." Each time I spoke, the object halted, resuming its movement when I stopped. I could hear it moving through the foliage, but couldn't discern any shape or form, only something the size of a flashlight lens appearing to observe us. Driven by curiosity, I continued to approach it. It suddenly stopped moving. The closer I got, the more it resembled a flashlight, one with a very weak and dim bulb, barely casting any light. Alternatively, it looked like a huge single eyeball reflecting light from some unseen source. We stood there, just looking at each other, not moving. It seemed like 5 minutes, but it was likely less than a minute. This thing, whatever it was, had been getting closer. Initially, it was about 100 feet away to our left, but now it was only 30, 40 feet away. When it moved, it bobbed up and down unpredictably, kind of like how a flashlight would look if someone was walking with it through a forest, stepping over twigs, logs, and rocks. I moved closer, trying hard to see what it was through the trees. Right then, the thing charged at me quickly. Before, it had been moving slowly, but now it was fast and deliberate. I turned around in the opposite direction, ran to grab my friend, and we rushed to our small, inflatable kayak tied to a tree by the river. I cut the rope, and we paddled away as fast as we could, not even daring to look back. We didn't even look behind us. We were just frantically paddling. We left our tent and food and bags behind and just took off. When the day broke later, we returned to retrieve our belongings and found everything just as we had left it, untouched. We didn't see any tracks, no footprints or hoofprints. We both witnessed the same thing and shared the same experience. Yet even now, we don't have a clear explanation for what the heck that was. Besides those incidents, there were many other eerie experiences, like the time we went on a road trip, car camping, and arrived at a secluded spot near Black Mesa Canyon at midnight. We stumbled upon an abandoned church camp that was downright creepy, with large padlocks and chains on the cabin doors, red spray-painted symbols, and huge upside-down crosses. Inside, we could see bunk beds tipped over, and the whole place just felt incredibly off-putting, radiating a strong vibe of "get out of here." I have many more creepy stories coming in the next episodes,